I am Brian Young, Executive Director at Action Network, and joined here with Christian and Liz to talk about organizing. And this moment we're in woodwork organizing. So Christian, Liz, why don't you take a second to introduce yourselves?
Liz, do you want to start?
Sure. So I'm Liz Rilley. I'm the organizing data strategist here at the National AFL-CIO, and I have been an organizer for the last 10 years in the labor movement. Started at SEIU in Michigan and then moved on to the Michigan Nurses Association, and I'm really excited to be here.
Super. My name is Christian Sweeney, and I'm the Deputy Organizing Director at the AFL-CIO. I also have been an organizer, I guess, professionally since about 1997, and unprofessionally before then. But I got my start in the UAW and was on the UAW staff for about 10 years before coming to the AFL about 10 years ago.
And I'll compliment Liz on her on-brand, on-message Zoom background. That's great. So yeah, I want to first ask, tell a quick story about me and my background. Before I got into all this, I actually worked in television. I worked at two jobs that were very similar sort of companies, broadcasters, in almost every way. The first place I worked, it treated me really terribly. And then I went to other places, expected the same thing, because it was a pretty similar organization, but I was an IBEW brother when I was there. And it made an enormous difference. So that experience of, being in a private sector union and seeing the difference really sort of fired me up about the possibilities of collective bargaining, just as I was starting out in a career, and it's sort of stuck with me ever since. And this was, at the time unions, weren't, there's definitely a different atmosphere, it feels now, than it ever was. I felt like an outlier back then. But, what are you both seeing? Why are we in this moment? Is there a real moment that's happening now with interest in organizing among workers? And just, any stories you're hearing out there?
I'd love to jump in, Christian, if you don't mind.
Yeah, please.
So the reason I think we're in this moment is kind of twofold, but I think primarily it's because of the last 10, 20, 40 years of all of the groundwork that organizers in the labor movement have been setting in line, right? So as an organizer, you learn to recognize these moments. I call them organizing moments, where there's just, you can't plan it or predict it. It's just things light on fire. And if you've done the groundwork, the donkey work of having one-on-one conversations, building relationships, building a campaign, building your union, then when those organizing moments happen, you're prepared to capture it. And I think right now we're in an organizing moment on a global scale. And because we have been working so doggedly for the last decade, 2 decades, build on the shoulders of people that came before us the last 100 years, we're in a position to capitalize on this organizing moment.
I think that's absolutely right. I sort of think that, Liz, that it's really about being ready to capitalize on moments. The growth in the labor movement has come in spurts. If you look over the history of the whole labor movement, and it's not like during those periods where the labor movement wasn't growing, it's not like people were sitting on their hands. They were doing all kinds of things. They were trying things and failing. They were, figuring it out. And so, knock on wood, we're due for a spurt. So we're hoping that this is this is part of it. But I would say, there's been a ton of press attention about Striketober, which is, fantastic. And it's really wonderful to see so many union members, standing up for themselves. And I think it's important also to think about like the great quit, the great resignation is really just like little strikes all over, right? It's a lot of people saying, you know what, this is really not enough. I'm going to go off, so do something else here. So that's another aspect of it. But I would say that, while there's been a lot of attention on this sort of, as this is a recent phenomenon, I'd actually say it's kind of consistent to where we were headed before the pandemic. If you look 2018, 2019, we had the most large strikes than any year since the early 80s. The public opinion about unions has been on the uptick since about 2009. And you're just getting stronger. I think some of those numbers are the highest they've been in a generation. So, I think ultimately, I feel like it goes back to the fact that, in that the social contract is broken. It's broken at, public employers, at private employers, that and workers are doing what they've always done. They're, rising up to get a fair return on their work.
Yes, I think it's a good point that this, that this is a continuation and a growth. I remember I was talking with one longtime union organizer a few years ago when the referees in the NFL went on strike, and the public really rallied around the referees. And when they came back, everybody cheered them. And you go back to previous, sports, because sports capture so many people that aren't necessarily, connected to progressive organizing.
Sure.
You go back to earlier strikes and it wasn't the same way. So I do think, it's a really good point. This has grown. And as you said, Liz, it's a growth out of years of organizing. And actually, before we get in, that's because organizing is a word that's thrown around a lot, but go ahead, Christian.
I'm sorry, if I just want to add one other thing though, but I also, I do think that this is continuation, but I also feel like the pandemic has played a really important role, and certainly the murder of George Floyd, has, I think, been a tremendous help to, for people to, and an inspiration for people to stand up for themselves. And, like there's something new happening there for sure. And that's not something we were seeing in exactly the same way in those earlier years.
Absolutely.
So there is, I think the pandemic year has been, fuel to the fire for that too. So I just wanted to make sure to mention that.
No, it's a good point. And, I'll go back to Liz with a brief detour, because I think the murder of George Floyd's a really good point in a case study in a way as well, because, we did I interviewed a woman who was part of the organizing within Minnesota, and they had been, Philando Castile had been murdered before. So there'd been a lot of organizing there. So, as Liz said, the organizing laid the groundwork, for that moment. And I was going to ask both of you to kind of dig in on that, because organizing is one of those words that's thrown around a lot. But, Liz talked about that kind of that long process of, one-on-ones and talking. And why don't we just take a second and both of you just talk about how you see organizing? What is organizing? People talk about it with lots of things, Obama 08 organizing, so just kind of lay out the groundwork of what we're talking about.
Gosh, that's a big question. There's so much to be said about that. But the first quote that comes to my mind, and Christian, maybe you know who this is attributed to. An organizer's job is to go around setting people on fire, right? So it's like people are exploited. That makes us angry, hurt, sad. It comes out in all kinds of sideways ways. We take it out on our families, we take it out on ourselves, what have you. We distract ourselves from it. But ultimately, workers are being exploited in this country and worldwide. And an organizer's job is to come and listen and help you to find words to express what's happening to you, and then find, get on fire, right? Get angry about it, allow that anger to come out, but then direct it in a healthy way towards a solution, towards a union in our case, right? So that we can take that power into our own hands and not rely on someone outside to make things better for us, because they're not going to. They're just going to keep exploiting us, and we're going to keep getting angry. But is it Rage Against the Machine that sings about anger as a gift, right? And so organizers' job is to help people find their power through that process.
It's always good to get a Rage Against the Machine reference. Moving into how technology, there was a if people haven't seen it, there was a good article in the Washington Post in which Christian was quoted a couple of times. It came out last week. I think I'm losing track of time again, but it came out last week about sort of the way technology is influencing organizing. We can start sort of broad. And the article was pretty broad about Facebook, social media, things like that. But Christian, why don't you sort of follow up on that? And your quote was, I'm trying to find it. Gone are the days when a clipboard and pencil will do the trick. So what do you think is, about the technology that's different now?
Yeah. And, I love a good clipboard and pencil. Don't get me wrong. There's a lot of time putting my 10,000 hours doing that kind of work. But I just feel like there's, the work of organizing is always about activist recruitment and development, right? It's always about replicating, getting people to do something that they're not already doing, and the highest thing you can do is to recruit someone else to do that work as well, not just to be a active participant. Okay, great, but an activist, that's really where the magic happens. And so, most of my experience in organizing has been on large campaigns, whether in higher education or childcare or casinos. Like there's a lot of, my time has been on big organizing campaigns. And the thing that I feel like the technology today can do is, what good organizers did with, Post-it notes and pencils and clipboards, we can do in a much, much easier, much more efficient way. So you still have to do the basic one-on-one. You still have to talk to folks, listen, find out, what their issues are, help them to realize their power and to teach them the basic things to do in a one-on-one conversation. But everyone's walking around with more computing power in their pockets than would took to put someone on the moon. Like it's bananas if we're not taking advantage of that. So so what I meant in the quote is that there's just so much we can do, such a better job in democratizing access to information. And that's really like the key part of what good organizing campaigns do, is they engage, sometimes I remember when I was first coming up as an organizer, more senior organizers would be like, would say to me, well, you can't share the numbers with the committee. You can't tell the committee how we're doing, how many cards we've got, where we're at in a given department or anything like that. And I was always like, that's crazy. Like, that's nuts. You have to share that stuff, because how else do we convince them that this is a worthwhile place to spend their time? Like, how do we, if we don't have, treat them like grownups and, let folks make decisions and engage strategically. Well, the tool like Action Builder, does that tremendously, right? And the best part is that it can do it in a safe way in terms of the data, in terms of privacy and all those sorts of things that are super important, and safe politically too, right? That we don't have to, we can be careful about who gets access to the list and how much of the list and all that, and all those sorts of ways, and use the technology for what it's really good at. But ultimately, the thing that can happen with tools like Action Builder is that you can be more efficient and help activists be more efficient with their time, to make sure the best information is getting out into the field and the best information is getting back to help for central planning and to help for strategy and execution.
I'd jump in to add, when I was organizing nurses in the hospital, we, on one campaign, we started with electronic authorization cards, but previous to that, they were paper cards, and we still use paper cards and they still have their place. But think of a nurse who's never been through an organizing campaign, and union busters are in their hospital and they're terrified of losing their jobs and their livelihood supporting their family. And they have a paper authorization card that they need to take and get physically signed. How terrifying that can be to a nurse, right? Versus sending a text, you can get those authorization cards signed by the end of the day, and the boss isn't any the wiser, right? So there's so many advantages of that. I think also, particularly with Action Builder, Action Network is another one. Signal's a texting app that I think we use widely in the labor movement, and I'm sure there's a million others, Slack, this and that. But with Action Builder specifically, our enemies, the corporate bad actors, the Walmarts, the Amazons, they're multinational corporations. Previous to this technology, your organizing campaigns had some limitation to geographical locality, right? Because you all have to be in the same war room together, looking at the same wall charts together. But now with Action Builder, I can have my wall chart, I can have my war room in my pocket with all the other professional organizers, with the director, of international maybe, or my, organizing director, all the organizers on the team. We can be in all 50 states running a campaign together and be looking at the same charts. And that's a scalability that we need right now when the corporate world, the private sector is functioning on a multinational scale.
Yeah, the scaling, and as Christian, as you start out, love a good pencil and paper as well. Because when we started out, and we were talking about Action Builder at the very beginning, the thing I was thinking about a lot is there's been a long-standing sort of conversation around technology and organizing that's really condescending to organizing, whereas organizing needs to get with the program, it needs to get with the 21st century. But Jean mentioned something in here about adapting technology to workers' needs. I mean, to me, that's really the bigger point of you can't use Salesforce for organizing. It's not built for organizing. It's built for commercial transactions, and really it's not about bringing organizing to technology. It's about bringing technology to organizing. And really focusing on the kind of relationship building and some of the stuff that you were talking about.
Yeah, I know when we were first, looking at, what should we be, the labor movement has done a lot to try and get on the political side to try and, get some standards for, what software people use and list building and, all those sorts of things. And that's a fantastic, role that the Federation has also played in helping that happen. But we always felt like, it's really not exactly the same model as organizing, as workplace organizing. And as we started to think about, well, is there a product off the shelf that we could buy, or do we need to develop something, and should we do it ourselves or do it with a partner? One of the things that clicked for me, in our partnership with Action Squared was that is that everyone at Action Squared was saying, well, really, it's about making organizing easier, not, we're not trying to replace one-on-one conversations with, text messages. Sure, there's a role for text messages, but it's not like there's, because it happens, on a phone, that somehow makes it, better than what happened. That it's about supporting the sort of good practices of organizing, of listening, keeping track of your data, keeping track of your lists, encouraging activism, all those sorts of things.
And, Liz, you talked about scale. What are some of the ways, we talked about how it can help in scale, not just Action Builder, but technology in general. But what are some of the specific sort of tactics and ways people have used technology?
So that's a big question too, and I want to answer narrowly around Action Builder again, just because, well, Christian referenced Striketober and the social media craze, wave that's produced, and that was done by clearly highly skilled communications experts and people who know how to leverage social media. I'm not one of those people. I am an organizer. I've been on the Facebook and the Twitter, and I found it doesn't always get me to that one-on-one face-to-face conversation. So what they have done with this hashtag Striketober and hashtag Strikewave is magic to me, and it's amazing. So there's a lot of ways that technology can be leveraged in different spaces. My expertise is in the organizing space, right? So I hesitate because I don't want to share any campaigns that wouldn't want me to talk about it. But generally speaking, there's a beautiful way that Action Builder is being used to take these campaigns. Let's talk about an imaginary shop, right? That has different types of workers, different industries represented by different unions, right? And maybe it's in multiple states even. Previously, it would be very difficult to run a campaign where the unions collaboratively were organizing wall-to-wall organizing these kinds of shops, right? But now with Action Builder, you can really, there's another phrase we use, organizing with a scalpel instead of with a hatchet, meaning you can really cut your turf up in such a way that the workers are part of IBEW or SMART or IATSE or whoever within one workplace can be organized by their respective expert organizers, right? Who are familiar with their particular issues and industry. And so that I think is a really exciting opportunity for us to collaborate across unions, across the labor movement, right? I mentioned geographically the ability to scale up across state lines. And then we didn't talk as much about the different user levels, but I was always taught that your job is to organize yourself out of a job. Meaning it was my job to find leaders, to find activists and empower them with skills and opportunities to self-organize, organize their own unions, right? And with Action Builder, it gives you a very tangible, tactile way to do that with the activist level. Start small, just give them maybe a door knocking turf or a phone calling turf. And then when they gain those skills, you can give them a permanent turf of the 10 people that they're responsible for talking to. And then up and up and up as they're gaining skills and confidence. And I mean, there's a use case in which you could just send them an Action Builder campaign and say, go. Come back to me when you got a list built. Come back to me when you've hit these benchmarks, right? And that can be done, iterated hundreds of times within the same campaign. So you really can organize with that scalpel to get the job done with a lot less of the resource inputs that we used to need, because we know resources are scarce and we don't have as many resources as the union busters and the corporations. So it's really exciting possibilities.
Yeah, I think the resource is another one that I thought about a lot at the beginning here, because, you know, the one-to-ones are, you know, sort of expensive in time, you know, and if they're paid organizers, it's expensive in resources. If they're, you know, your highest trained organizers who spend a lot of time, you know, all that time adds up, and it is hard to scale. So, you know, your point, Liz, is good, you know, about, because we're organizing yourself out of a job, and I do think that there's a role in technology in making that a lot easier, you know, so that you can do that a lot quicker and you know, scale that a lot more. Christian, you were talking a little bit about this. I'll just kick it to you to riff on.
Sure.
Max, you were talking about something like that before too.
Yeah, I think that, you know, it's impossible to, it was somewhere along the way, I think probably back in the 90s, early 2000s, I think it was SCIU, but I'm not entirely sure, did some numbers on, you know, some ideal sort of like how many staff you need per worker, and, you know, how much would it take, how many staff do we need to increase unit density by, you know, a certain amount. And, you know, if you had, you know, one staff person for every 100 workers in a campaign, you know, like it's impossible. Like we can't get there with just doing this by staff. Like we can't, you know, the labor movement has never grown by professional staff organizers like Liz and I doing all the work. It's just the economics of it are don't work. My first organizing campaign, you know, was my home local 20 UAW 2065. You know, when we first organized, we were 10,000 teaching assistants, readers, and tutors in the University of California system. I'm proud to say we only had three full-time staff people to do that. You know, the campaign was, you know, had some people were on like project staff in various places, but the thing only worked because we got, you know, hundreds of people to be active participants in the organizing drive, actively going out, signing folks up to organize them for a strike and then to organize them for an election. And, you know, that's the thing we're trying to make easier with Action Builder. The sort of value proposition here is that we need tools to help get folks more engaged, and whether that's in union elections or in the strike wave, right? You know, you know, Action Builder right now is being used mostly by national unions and organizing programs, but we do have some local unions who are using it. And I think, you know, in terms of the strikes that we're seeing, you know, strikes also only succeed if the members take it on. It cannot be purely staff led, and, you know, Action Builder has tremendous power and possibility there.
You know, I guess, why don't you dig in on that a little bit about how you get to a strike? So, you know, I always think about organizing, you know, the power of organizing is in its depth of connections, you know, in the empowerment that you talked earlier about, Liz, and that, you know, the only way you get to the really big, hard asks is through organizing. You know, you can get people to turn out on the street or donate or something through mobilization tech, you know, Action Network, Every Action, you know, all that. But, you know, the really high bar asks, not just in labor, but in civil rights, you know, the civil rights era organizing, you know, women's suffrage, you know, all these things took a lot of organizing. So why don't you just talk about kind of the key factors? We only have a couple of minutes, so I'm starting with a huge question for short answers, but like some of the key factors and how you get there. To making these kinds of big asks of people. Go ahead, Liz.
Yeah, can I intervene? So I'd like to say that a bad boss is sometimes the best organizer. And this pandemic has made it impossible to ignore or hide behind excuses that there's a lot of bad bosses out there, right? So, and then that coupled with the foundation that we've laid is preparing us. But, you know, it's not a sexy answer, but it's the same organizing basics. To get to a strike is the most escalated action you can run in a campaign. It's the highest ask to make, the hardest thing to do, right? But the basics, mechanics are the same as any other campaign. Start with a one-on-one conversation. Are you willing to sign a petition? Are you willing to attend a rally? Are you willing to march on the boss? Do those tests, do those structure tests, and work up the way to escalation. And if that doesn't work and you don't get what you need at the bargaining table or at what have you, then your folks are going to be ready for a strike.
And that's where, you know, Action Builder can be used to the same way it could be, you know, a lot of unions are using it for, you know, NRLB style elections, but be used for a strike vote turnout, right? I mean, if you look at the IATSE, near strike, and we'll see what happens. The members are voting on it, obviously, on the tentative agreement. But no doubt their power at the table was bolstered by the fact that they had a monster strike vote with huge participation. So that's exactly the kind of thing you can use Action Builder for. You could use Action Builder for figuring out your picket captains and your picketing shifts, or figuring out showing up on the first day of picketing, like who's giving rides to whom, to get to the picket line. There's a lot of pretty much everything that goes into the escalation for a strike, are things that Action Builder is nimble enough to use. They're all organizing problems.
Yeah, I could talk about all this all day, and we didn't even get into like mobilization tech and how you can tie that in, and there's a billion things to talk about. But one holdover from the TV career I mentioned earlier is I finish on time, because we got to get to the next show. So we're at 1:30. So thanks to everyone, and thank you, Christian, and thank you, Liz, for hopping on. And we'll do more of these.
Super. Thank you.
All right.
Great. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks to the people who came to listen.